Ponchissimo. Can that be the superlative?
Sure.
Sure. Okay, are we ready? We're ready. Fire line is ready. It being 6:34 and a quorum is present, we'll call the roll, beginning with Marnie.
Marty Crouch, present. Rosie Kennedy here.
Dave Wanker here.
Kristen Kasner here.
Jack Lawrence here.
Dana Lara here.
Emil Dahlquist here.
Lauren Lynch here.
And the bee.
Eloise Matheson here.
Oh, my goodness, all dressed up.
Love her headband.
Yeah, she wanted to look nice for her. So you give her.
Oh, so cute. Look at her.
Okay, so Patrick will do the summary, if you would.
All
The
right.
floor is yours, sir.
Just to get people up to speed, everyone's aware that we have advised Weston and Sampson to finish up with what we call Phase 1, which is finishing with their integrating the comments from the committee on the existing reports that we've had for a while now. They're in the process of doing that. I should have those available and to you early next week. We are also looking for another consultant to do what we consider to be Phase 2, which is data evaluation and future conditions of what we want Hamilton to be as part of this master plan. That is the focus this evening. I've sent around a compilation of a number of the comments that you all have provided me. About 2:45 this afternoon, I had to assemble them and try to put them into some thoughts that could be used for consultant solicitation purposes. So if I received your information after that time, I really didn't, and I apologize, Emil, didn't have the ability to integrate them. But in any event, that is the discussion purpose tonight, is to work through the information that I've provided you in the text item I emailed out to everyone, the Master Plan Steering Committee Consultant Scope Phase 2. It's all of one side of one page with one small item on the back page. So if people haven't picked it up on the podium, it's there.
On your handout.
So, with that, again, I wanted to utilize people's comments. You understand, as I have advised folks, the town manager is the contract manager for the town. He does the procurement. He and the Board of Selectmen chair do want a level of control of the process. However, they do want your input, and that's why we're focusing on that topic this evening. They want to integrate it into a scope that we will put before consultants over the next few weeks. I have been told by Joe that until we have another consultant in place, that we're going to hold off on conducting meetings until that new consultant is put in place. So we've got some homework to do, which is getting this scope put together, again with your help tonight, and then we'll get it out to the consultant world. Yes, we have some contacts there that we're interested in working with potentially, but we do need to advertise it and get it out for all the procurement processes that the public expects of us. So I think that's pretty much the introduction for tonight's meeting.
Patrick, can I ask how long will the period be to receive RFQs?
Say again?
How long will the time period be between when you put out the RFQ to when the quotes are due? How long will that be?
Typically, you want to provide a workable period to allow, number one, the consultants to review. They want to ask questions.
Right.
They want to wrestle with whether or not they want to work with what's expected of them. Then they need to prepare the proposal. So I'm expecting it at a minimum a month
Okay.
for that process.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry to be long-winded. My wife tells me I'm often that way, but
It's all right.
it sometimes yes and no answers don't give people a very satisfactory.
Well, you've
Kind of
provided
response.
context, which I know we all appreciate.
Great. So, does everybody have the text that I prepared? If not, again, they are on the podium.
I have my phone, thank you.
Have we got a supply there on the?
Yes, there's several up there.
Did you get one?
I've got, yes, I printed it out.
I have it.
First of all, I think it's really important for any consultant to understand
Thanks.
what we are as a community. I've asked, and some of you did have in your suggestions, making sure that the consultants reviewed existing materials. That is including the existing master plans. It'd be also including the Phase 1 information that we'll have from Weston and Sampson that has the benefit of your comments as part of that. We've recently gotten this Dewberry report. They need to review that, have an understanding of what it means. I think they also need to have an understanding of what our zoning is. I'm sure they're gonna have their areas of expertise and areas that they wanna focus on, that maybe I've not included here, but we need them to understand the community. That's something that we, felt was lacking with Weston and Sampson. That'll be the last time I kick them on the shins tonight, but it's important for consultants to understand who their clients are.
Patrick, may I hand out some of the work that I did?
Sure.
I didn't get it to you in time. I apologize. Pass it.
Sure, yeah. Do you also, do you have it electronically so you could send it to Lauren?
I will, I don't have it here.
I can send it to Lauren.
I apologize, I didn't realize I was supposed to get material to you, Patrick, but, and I'm not sure what you did, Emil,
Gotcha.
but I just went to the scope of work that Weston and Sampson responded to.
Yeah, that's what I did.
That's what I did too.
Yeah.
And amended that. And there were some good concepts in what Patrick has handed out,
Yeah.
but I tried to use your outline and inserted the different components that need to be completed or reviewed and assessed for accuracy and completeness in the scope of work. So you and I were pretty much on the same page. And I can I actually can forward that to everyone. I might be able to do it from my phone tonight, but I can do it. But I'm sure Neil is probably, what you did is very similar and maybe much better than what I did. I didn't have too much time.
Okay, but before we get into this, there's a little bit of housekeeping I just want to do. For all of you that may or may not have been aware, Joe, our town manager, was on the short list for town manager in Ipswich, and the vote was this week, and they selected somebody else. So he's been passed over, so he continues to be our town manager at the moment. The other issues, I sent Patrick an email this morning, and I don't think it got passed around, which is probably not a bad thing at all. Let me, if I can just read it, then it'll give you a summary of what I think the scoping aspects of the thing is, and then we can go on to the people who really count here and go from there. I said, Patrick, pages 9 through 12 of the RFQ were an eye-opener, and they were very, very comprehensive, extremely comprehensive. It was a good RFQ. Unfortunately, it didn't solicit much of a response, but go on to say we would never have completed it at the rate we were going, given the budget remaining, because we'd used, what, 75%, Patrick, I think, of the budget, and we hadn't looked forward at all, and I think that's what we need to do now, is look forward. The new scope must look ahead with a vision tempered by the present financial condition of the town, which is encumbered by major capital expenditures for projects too long deferred: water system, town hall, downtown septic, housing diversity, and the replacement of obsolete school buildings and athletic facilities. These payments will limit discretionary spending for decades, and I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, because we're not going to have a lot of money kicking around for ice rinks and bowling alleys and things of that nature. We've got to tend to business now, with things that have been passed over for a long, long time. A proper financial projection should be prepared as soon as possible to get a handle on this before climate change and aging infrastructure catch us unawares. We need this test as well to determine how our present tax base will cope within the limits imposed by 2.5. And I fear it won't. John Prulidge advises this project should not be difficult using his tool. So he's got his projection tool, and I spoke to him yesterday, and he said that'd be a fairly simple, straightforward project. It's just a matter of adjusting the assumptions, and then we would have some idea of what the tax rate would be like over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and how much wiggle room we have. And I think that's an extremely important thing as well for anybody being interviewed for the next part of this project is concerned. Okay, the new scope then should take this info, and depending on what happens in October, the warrant calls for a vote on $65,000, which hopefully Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary would see fit to top up, for a study to be done on the Winthrop School property, the Gordon Conwell property, and downtown areas of town. I'm not sure quite why the downtown areas of town. I take your point, Rosie, on that. I don't see where that's a factor necessarily.
That's the only.
Including incidental and related costs. So that's Article 2.2-3 in the warrant. Assuming the special town meeting votes that $65,000, and that proceeds as quickly as possible to knock this whole thing off top dead center, whoever responds to the RFQ should outline that course depending on the assumptions made in that study, and then take it forward for master plan purposes. We need to press Weston and Sampson for the survey results. I view those as having been responded to by the people who care enough to put out the energy to actually get them back to it. We got about 300 of those, and I think it's extremely important that our presence is felt at any large public gathering, that people know we're there, that we make noises or whatever else we need to do. But I have to say that I seriously considered whether we need to spend the money on another formal survey. I think money is going to be the budget here is going to be difficult, because we're not going to get any money back, I'm assuming, from Weston and Sampson. Patrick, is that a valid assumption, or?
I don't think there's going to be a clawback, per se,
That's unbelievable.
but I don't think they're going to be receiving what they
The
anticipate.
55,000, you think they'll get that, or?
You know what, I don't want to comment on that.
Okay. Anyway, that's out there. So I think we need to be cognizant of how much money will be available as a budget for the next phase, this last phase, which is obviously extremely important. So the prioritization is going to be an important thing that we all need to set. And I also think it's extremely important that during the interview process, that this committee is represented. That we went into this process having had no input whatsoever into the original RFQ, and the selection of Weston and Sampson. And I think it's extremely important that if we are to have appropriate input and make our presence known and useful to the town, that it's extremely important that we be a part of that interviewing process. So that's where, those are the conditions preceding, to my way of thinking, to scoping out the next phase.
I use this microphone. I agree with you. I just want to make a couple clarifying comments in the interest of transparency. So there probably will not be a formal RFQ process for this second round. I think, so the goal of today's meeting is to get a clear understanding of, assuming that we have a fairly small pot of money left, I would say less, 50,000 or less, to wrap up this. What we need to decide is, what defines success for that deliverable, and what does that deliverable need to do, so that we can work closely with the one or two folks that have been brought to us to say, like, this person's a good person, and then we need to be very clear with them about, this is our expectation of what this deliverable is. And we need it within the next 4 to 6 months, because we can't keep spinning our wheels. So I think, yes to that, the money is a consideration. And the scope is going to be significantly smaller than most of us are comfortable with, because due to the choices that we made in the process we went through, we burned a lot of cash in the first half of this work. So I think the most constructive use of time today is really saying, what are those must-haves? And it's going to be a list of 3 to 5 things, small, specific, tactical deliverables that come in this master plan. And I don't think it's going to look like the master plan we thought it was going to be when we set out to do this 15 months ago. And there's a sort of working framework that we've been discussing sort of in the background about making sure that we leverage all of the existing conditions as they've been worked on to date. And then I think there's a formal process of sort of assessing and synthesizing what's in those existing conditions documents to get to some data-driven recommendations. And then I do think there needs to be a public interaction part from there. But I would just encourage everyone here today to think about, when in 6 months, what is the thing that we need to show success? And I agree, the Gordon Conwell thing, if it goes through a town meeting, that's going to be in parallel, but it probably will not be integrated into this process. So it will be 2 different consultant groups doing that work. But what's going to make us feel good, and what's going to be actually useful and tactical based on the 50,000 or less that we have to spend on this second phase. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the objective remains the same for us, though, and that is to come out with a master plan that places the town on a fiscally stable basis, which I do not believe will be shown it is now.
I agree. I think, though, it might be more of, here are the directions you can go, and then it's up to the town to decide after the fact. I don't think the master plan is going to give us that direction. I think it's going to give us the possibilities, the strategic directions we could go in. I think there's too many differences of opinion in this core group about what those directions could and couldn't be, and I think we need some data to support them, and we need to understand the financials of each of those directions, and we need to get town input about those directions. Because I don't think it's realistic that in 4 to 6 months, we're going to have a singular plan based on where we are and the timeline and the involvement of this group. I don't think it's realistic. I'd love to be proven wrong, and if we can come up with a scope that's succinct and smart and can do that with the money we have. I mean, I've worked in consulting for 15 years. I don't think that's what we're gonna get. So my question is, what could we get that would still feel really good and useful and represent the opinions of this group and the entire town, and would help us make those choices that we have to make, that isn't necessarily a verbatim blueprint for the future, because I think we've lost the opportunity to get to that blueprint. I could be wrong, but $50,000 is very, very little money. For essentially what I saw from what Patrick shared is like people rescoping the entire project.
Yeah, we're not going to do that.
It's not going to happen. We have
Not gonna
existing
happen.
conditions. I would say we have 40% of the budget that was swirled and unfortunately lost. And then we have this chunk of money, and we need to figure out what success looks like with that. And again, I encourage us to just sort of brainstorm and prioritize and do all that today. But I mostly want to be transparent, and I want to set expectations that, this isn't time for pie in the sky. This is really like, we're pivoting and we're salvaging. And like, what does that look like? So that we still feel successful in the end.
Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot of options out there, to tell you the truth. So I think this thing ought to simplify pretty quickly, and
Yep.
that's where it needs to go. Dana?
I appreciate you speaking frankly.
Yep.
That I think that's, I have a real concern that, I don't know, I'm going to choose not to say what I'm going to say.
I think you should say it.
No, go on.
No,
Can-
if you
can,
have a
um,
real concern, we'd love to hear it.
I'm going to take the pause, and then we can certainly go back. But I think one of the things that is, I think, so troubling to me is where we have had, I mean, we can be frustrated with some of the way in which we've gone about this, but we have been out there and we've talked. We went to Shop Local. We're going to Shop Local this year. We were at Hamilton Day. We've had really good engaging conversations. Have we had enough? No, we absolutely haven't had enough. We did put out a survey. We don't have the results. So I think there's frustration, but there's been a lot of really great work and conversation throughout this process. And this continued kind of, we can be frustrated and work through it, but I think the more we're not celebrating and talking about the great conversations we're having and outreach and work that we are accomplishing, and us as a committee, I think that's going to be problematic to being successful with anything at this point. And I also think that we're here, we're looking at this scope, but it's a little bit unclear what we're here to do. And we're clearly not picking or being part of the process of the consultants that I guess have been brought to people. And then I guess I'm just really, if we're not having a conversation together, I don't know what conversation we're having that's going to be successful. And just the comment of we've been discussing in the background, quote unquote, is like, that I think, I don't know. I think there's a lot of work that we should be really proud of. The November meeting was it was well attended. We had a lot of good information. Are we missing momentum along the way? Are we having a little frustration in the process? Absolutely. But this is a really good thing and a good opportunity to have a conversation among ourselves. I mean, some of us have been in government for a long, long time. Some of us are brand new, and some of us have been here for a long time in Hamilton. Some of us are newer. So it's going to be hard to all sit together and be like, oh, we're best friends, and we're not. We all come from different places and different opinions. I don't know, I just want to emphasize that this has been good, and this whole process is good, and doing a master plan and talking about what our future is really good. And I feel like meeting after meeting, we're arguing and saying bad things about things, and I feel like who would want to come, I don't know, be part of this unless it's something that's really fun and good and that we want to continue. So I appreciate the comments, and I agree with all the comments. I agree that we're not going to we have a limited budget and a limited scope, and we want to get out of this what we can to then hopefully set us up for whatever the next step from this is. Are we going to have the 500-page document? I don't know if we even wanted the 500-page document, but we've agreed and voted on some really interesting ways in which to organize the document, and between protect, provide, grow, and looking forward. And I think just thinking about how we want to organize ourselves in this document is great. I'm really appreciative of Emil's work putting this together. But I don't know, just the positive and moving forward, I think there's something really great here. And I
don't think any of that, I don't think we want to throw any of that away. There is really good work that's been done, and there has been a lot of frustration, and I'll be candid with you, like, most of the emails I get are the frustration, right? So that's a lot of what when I say behind the scenes, it isn't like cloak and dagger. It's that there are subgroups that are coordinated to people who know each other better, who are emailing amongst 2 or 3 of people, and then that gets forwarded to a group, and then there's miscommunication that group decided something, and then one group, so like that happens. It's part of the process. I think my question is, how do we do the best job documenting all the great stuff, putting it together, and then putting it into a forum? I think the structure that Emil came up with was great. I don't think we should lose that at all. I don't think we can rescope and have a new consultant go back and fill in some of the gaps or do some of the wish list items that we had. It's more, where have we gotten to date? What stuff have we documented? What stuff have we agreed upon? What input do we have? And what is the deliverable that we can easily or sufficiently get to with what's left in our budget? Because I mean, I'm coming into this so new, but I agree there's great stuff. I don't know, outside of the existing conditions, which has been documented, where that stuff lives. How is it represented? How do we show that work has been done? How do we share it with the consultant? I don't know the answers to those questions. And I think because it isn't in a formalized, documented way, it appears as if it hasn't been done to satisfaction, right? Like, where is it? Where's the reflection of those meetings? And it's not that it doesn't happen, but I guess my point is we can't go back and recreate that stuff. So we either need to find it and document it and supply it, because I don't think we're going to have, a $30,000 engagement budget.
Right, and I'm sorry, I should just jump in, but I agree, and I think that is one of the pieces that we need to make sure that we are getting the reflection of those presentations and that conversation. From the first phase here, before we move in, but we're getting that piece, so it has been worth our while. So I very much agree with.
Well, if I could just jump in here too, I think public engagement is what a master plan is all about, and that's imperative that we have more public engagement. So that necessarily needs to be part of the scope. And there are some things that have been done. Unfortunately, we were not responsible for organizing that. The entity that is wrapping up. And we, I think, kept expecting this group is going to do this. And so in our defense, we have worked very hard over the past year as a group, and we expect to continue doing that, and I think we've all learned a great deal about a master plan over the past year. So I hope that whoever is behind the scenes here is understanding that we have been through a very painful and long learning process, and we will take that forward as we move along in this next phase. So we don't want the work and effort that we've put in to be discounted because another entity
was not able to fulfill their obligation. The town should not suffer. Our master plan should not suffer. Our vision for the future should not suffer. It's a critical part of any town, and especially a small town like ours that's having some growing pains, going through some changes. So I hope that as the board thinks about this, they will consider those factors as well.
Yeah, of course. And this is not a reflection, I know Patrick wasn't going to kick their shins anymore, but I will. To your point, like, many of us were new to this process, and if we weren't managed appropriately by the consultant, like, that is on the consultant, that we bled budget for months and months because the consultant wasn't leading the process appropriately. That is not on this group at all.
So perhaps the consultant should bear some of the financial responsibility for
Well,
that.
and I want to be clear that that's actually what a lot of this sort of is about. And when I say in the background, it is quite literally trying to figure out, like, the contract wasn't broken out into segmented budgets. It was one budget for the entire process. And so working out with them what they think they have done versus what they haven't, like, clawbacks I mean, you know this more than clawbacks is really difficult. And we've already paid a large portion of this budget over to them based on the duration and what they would consider the amount of work that's happened.
But we need to consider from our viewpoint what has happened and what hasn't happened. Just because they say they've done this and this doesn't necessarily make it so.
Oh, agreed. And I think we are eyes wide open on that part of it, which is,
Could I make just a few comments? I mean, there's a real difference between a clawback and a breach of contract.
Rosie, can you give Marnie some of your
Yes.
microphone? Sorry.
So I'm pointing out the difference between a clawback and breach of contract. And I appreciate what you're saying, but now we have a very limited budget. A master plan really is something that the planning board and other boards in town will need to rely on. So rather than cobble together a bare minimum master plan, another concept might be is suspend the process so that we can accumulate funds to do a really good job. Because if we try and just cobble together something, it may or may not be a functional document. It may be something that's just put in the circular file and never referred to again because it doesn't have enough substance to it to make it meaningful. So that's my only thought in terms of where we are. We do have some public participation. What I did, and I mentioned it before, I just went through the scope of work. So one of the first tasks for the new consultant would be to assess whether more public participation in terms of in the form of a survey is required, or whether we have enough content from those surveys to draw conclusions. And so that would be one area where the work could be somewhat reduced. And also just assessing the existing conditions, because that's, to me, we got existing conditions and some maps.
Yep.
And so the new consultant could look at those existing conditions and decide what to do with them. But the rest of the scope of work really is not completed. And I don't know for $50,000 whether it can be done. And I don't know what portion of Emil's outline we can drop out. And if we drop out too many things, then again, it's not a worthwhile document. It's
Okay.
not meaningful.
Carolyn, I have a question for you, but first, I'm not sure that you're aware of the history of this committee's attempt to monitor the expenditure of money in this project.
I am.
So you're aware that the committee wanted a treasurer position. It was voted on, it was occupied. There was an attempt to pursue that dutifully, and the manager ultimately told us that's none of our business. So we were unable to track in the course of the time period the expenditure versus the product and make comments about that. I think you and your colleagues should be cognizant of that. Have you had an opportunity to look at Patrick's?
I have.
Do you view that as achievable, given the budget constraints that you've related?
I think it's a really good start, and I think it outlines some of the key concerns that we still have. I don't know that it goes far enough, and Dana, I think maybe you have some perspective here. I don't think it goes far enough to really outline what the deliverable is and what it needs to do. To your, to the point of like, can other committees and commissions in town use this as, a guidepost for decision-making and prioritization? I don't know that reading what Patrick put together, I'm not sure that comes out. It's almost too big and too vague at the same time. Like specifically, we can't answer all those questions, I think. Or we can, or to your point, we need to back away and say, we're gonna start this whole process over again once we have more budget and more time.
That's,
But I don't think that's the desire of the group. But the goal is for everybody here to sort of decide today what those really important key scope pieces are. And if the recommendation of the group is, it's everything that's left that we already had in the original scope, and this isn't worth doing if we don't hit all of those things, then that's the recommendation of this group, and we go back and figure that out.
nobody said that.
Let me try and summarize what I think we've accomplished to date, and that is in the existing conditions,
Jack,
pretty well ascertained.
may I just,
Oh, sorry.
I apologize, may I just
No, go for it.
continue for a minute? So Patrick has listed certain specifics toward the end of his work product: climate change, economic development, ongoing public-to-town engagement, forum-based zoning, amendments to town, conservation commission bylaws, means of addressing the MBTA, community zoning. He did not include, and I would have asked him to include, some water, generic subject of water, and community character. Are those labels that are achievable with a remaining budget, do you believe, in terms of a reasonable approach?
If those all align to categories within the existing conditions and don't require their own set of research, then I think anything that's already represented in the body of research done in existing conditions, yes. If we're now saying we need somebody to go do a water study,
We just did a water
just
study.
did it.
right,
so
but
we're all
like,
set.
we need you to go do your own, and we need you to do an assessment.
No, why-
I'm not saying that's true.
No, she's just
I'm
using that as
literally
an
just here saying,
example.
like, depending on what we're saying we're giving them and what we would need them to then do with that or add to that, that changes how many of those things that I think we can adequately expect a consultant to report back in.
Right, so I'm not talking about existing conditions, I'm talking about the consultant providing us with some kind of blueprint for the future within those categories.
But the data inputs are the existing conditions, right? Like, that's why this group was so focused on those existing conditions, that we wanted to make sure that the data in was accurate, so that the synthesis of that data then was correct. And my only point is that if we're assuming that if the stuff is represented in the current existing conditions that we hand over, that's a great thing, right? That's a ton of stuff that we can give to a consultant to say, we did all the legwork, we need you to do the synthesis, and we need you to do the sort of the analysis, and we need you to help us get to this. That's great. If there are new things, like the MBTA thing, like how much of that do they now need to go back and research and better understand and do? I don't know. Because that list gets very, very specific about things that are on the table for us right now. Those aren't really future forward generic categories. A lot of those things are like very specific questions we want them to answer for us. And again, this is a data gathering. I'm not responsible for the final scope. I'm just trying to represent sort of the reality of what I've seen in the conversations I've had with the budget that we have and the concerns that I've heard. I mean, candidly, from individuals in this group who've emailed me. So it's I feel a little bit like this is the Inquisition of me. Like I'm just the colander here of things that I've been gathering over the last couple of weeks.
Lauren has her hand up.
Let me reiterate the fact that this is a collection of inputs. This is not my piece. This is a collection of the inputs that I've gotten from most of you.
I didn't mean to suggest this was your invention, but you typed it up kindly and That's why I called it your work product.
Yeah, and I think the reason, and not at all, I mean, I feel like we're like us and you, but I think the statement of whatever your recommendation is, we'll take it, and then we will figure it out. Who's we is the question, and that's, I think, what's frustrating, at least it's frustrating me a little bit, of kind of like, we're here together to figure this out as your appointees to do this job. So I think that's the piece of it. But in my opinion, we've done a lot of it. You know, existing conditions are super duper important.
Yes.
And there are a lot of information of this whole question of what we want to protect and where we want to grow. If we do nothing in this but recognize and outline and map opportunity that we should talk about in just a collective way of, here are 15 areas that the future might be different, let's talk about it. If that's all we do, that's super important, because this 75% of Hamilton is gonna be what it is, and we're gonna protect it. I think, just so we can narrow it down and have these real conversations, we haven't even gotten to talk about the scope yet, but,
Oh, that's what we're
anyway, just, that phrasing is what's hitting me a little bit off of, like, you know, you guys do this and then we'll do that. It's like, we're here to do this together, and that's at least for me, over the language. I know Lauren has a comment too.
But, yeah, but let me say,
Lauren has been-
Lauren wants to, okay.
I do. And maybe this is a slight pivot, but I think, I mean, a thought that I'm having, because as I'm looking through what Patrick put together, I think there's a lot of like very useful content here, obviously, but it is not clear to me, as Carolyn has mentioned, exactly what the deliverables that we are expecting to see are. And I am thinking, since we as a group have already voted to adopt Amal's outline, a useful framework that we could use to think about, okay, what have we already done and what do we have left to do, would be to like very simply use the outline Amal has created. And I'm picturing some sort of just like bar chart next to every section on it, like how far are we in that section? And that's a very clear, specific guide for the new consultant to see where do we already have the content that's needed and what are the key items that need to be developed. And these kind of bullet points on this scope document provide the context for, you know, how to achieve the deliverables in terms of specific chapters that we want to see developed, where the content's coming from, what content is still missing. But that gives us really clear line items so that when we come to the end of it and say, you know, have you developed deliverable 1, deliverable 2, deliverable 3, it's very easy to see whether or not they've achieved the goal of the contract, which seems to be the challenge that we're coming across right now with the prior contract, which, like, if we just take the last item here, consultant shall provide a draft master plan at 95% completion, it's very subjective what that means. And so I think if, like, we have a framework that Amal has developed and we've voted to use that framework, so it feels like a very easy lift for us to use that within the contract document.
Yeah, and Lauren, I emailed you Amal's red line that's passed out here.
Oh, perfect. Okay,
Yeah.
awesome, thank you.
But I think
But,
that's.
well, this red line, though, oh, you go ahead. I mean, this is, red line doesn't, it follows more the scope of work that was given to, correct?
Yeah, it does.
It- Which is a little bit different than what Lauren is suggesting.
It is, but it really is a beginning. First of all, I appreciate your willingness to come and sort of lay reality on us. I think we're all sort of aware of that, and I think anybody who's done this, part of the reason that Weston and Sampson probably will not be part of this going forward is that I think a lot of us knew that they were never going to get there at the time that they planned, and it's never good to kind of force them to do something in a very quick manner that we're not going to appreciate at all. So I think that it is a reality now, and I certainly don't take it as you're trying to change anything here. But I think if we do have limited funds, I don't see how we can continue this as a master plan as such with the amount of money that's available. It either has to be, we have to determine how much more is is, or needs to be raised, to find out whether we can still do a master plan and how much more that might be. Maybe once a consultant is, and they may not even take the project if they're required really to do what we're asking them to do. It's also, I mean, there are options. We could sort of tackle this as take on particular problems. I first of all had, the work we put in and the framework and so forth, it was done in good faith, and it was an interesting exercise to do that and a nice way to organize it. But it is. It doesn't have to be a final thing.
I think it's actually a good thing, though. I mean, I think there's
But-
leadership and expertise in the room, and so, like, could you base a scope off of the protect, provide,
Yeah.
grow framework and say, like, y'all were doing a lot more work that like a consultant would have taken on initially, so
I would absolutely streamline everything to the hilt, and I think really hold the consultant to hold their feet to the fire to get this done in a manner. So I think what I did was take the original RFP, and I don't think you have a finished version, but
I think Kristen sent it out to everyone.
yeah, I didn't finish what I was writing until about 5:30 anyway. But what what I was trying to do is take that information that was given to us in that RFP, because I thought by and large it was pretty well written in terms of a RFP from the town for a master plan. So I didn't have any major issues. I think in hindsight, I think it we should have looked back to this document much more aggressively than we did. And David is right. He was really the only one here who was critical of the progress of the consultants going forward. And but what I would, I think we either change our task to deal with a couple of problems here in town or major concerns as part of a plan, or put it on hold till a future time until there is sufficient money available. Or really try to make an effort to streamline it going forward and see how that works out. But it's going to really involve a lot of time with this committee going forward, I think, to make that happen. And the consultant to realize that it has to be streamlined. But, to get a document like this, I don't think we really want that, number one. But number two, I think we can still get a lot of good information into a master plan in all of these elements, as long as there's not extraneous material and sort of boilerplate material in a lot of the document. We can just really streamline it, I think. I think it's possible, but there's really a challenge now going forward. So I wouldn't say it's impossible to do it, but
Don't we have $50,000 and $65,000? That's about $115,000, am I correct?
the 65 is specifically for the Gordon Conwell.
Okay, so that's not for the master
That's not
plan.
master plan. That is money that's being approved to do like a site audit and strategy for Gordon Conwell.
And Winthrop School.
They're separate.
Well, it says in
Does it say
the
it's
warrant article is Winthrop School. I mean, it says Winthrop property, and I'm assuming that's Winthrop School.
yeah, it is.
Okay.
It's part of it was meant to be a kind of a strategic plan for those two sites.
Those two, it might be. I'm trying to think
So,
of the meeting when
They have
Scott
different-
Mattern came and I think wanted to add.
They have different timelines, but there's some, there's some benefit to having kind of a strategic look at those two properties.
Agreed.
And make some good judgments about.
And there is some
Winthrop
urgency to the, obviously to the Gordon one.
Yeah.
We're also hoping that they're going to put some skin in the game as
They've got
well.
to be kicked in the butt. They're
Well,
not going
they're-
anywhere at this point.
There's been some movement in their desire to engage with us on this because I think they see that, a rezoning is probably the most strategically beneficial for them.
It's the only thing for them. They're not going to get any money otherwise. And
So,
and if
can I just-
somebody has to be clear to.
Can I just, because this meeting had one agenda item, which is that we're supposed to figure out
Scope,
the scope.
right.
And I think, I appreciate Carolyn's directness, but to me, if I'm following the agenda, what we need to do is we need to make a decision about, and the way I'm looking at it is, do we want the scope to be so I see a few ways we could do this. One, we could look at what the sort of what Lauren was just mentioning, the thing that we've agreed upon, and we could hash out the entire scope, which is what our vision and dream was, and we can say, this is the scope, this is what we want. And then moving forward, figure out what that means in terms of money. The second thing we could do, in my mind, is we could say, you know what? We see that there's some financial realities here. Maybe what we want to do is to slow things down, get really deep, good public engagement information, use the money to really get really robust, clear vision from the community about what direction they dream a master plan goes in, and have that be the scope, that we get real clarity on that. And that information might be useful to our various boards and committees in town to do work. In other words, if we were providing the zoning board and the board of selectmen, the select board, with really good information, then perhaps, so that would be a different area. And then to me, the third option is sort of what I think Carolyn might have been just suggesting was, is there something in all of these, the work that we've done, that this committee wants to say, actually, no, we really want to narrow our focus, and we want to say, yep, it's not really a master plan because we're not going to cover everything, but we want to say to the consultant, we have one specific area that we want you to really dive into, and, we say it's, economic development, or and I'm making that up, I'm not saying that's what it should be, or it's water use, right? And that's the thing. So those are my kind of three options to kind of bring us back to the topic of today. And we've already been here an hour. The topic of today should be defining what is the scope of work that this committee wants to say is what we want.
So I would like
If I,
to,
can I just,
I just want to clarify something with Patrick, since you had some sensitivity about my attribution to you earlier. Since this is not your work product, what would you suggest to us as a planning director in terms of the issues before us this evening?
You know what, I think the three areas that this committee has embraced, which are the protect, provide, and grow, separate those into some work tasks that are discrete, that are not amorphous, that are attainable. And I think that would be a workable game plan that would give us a product.
Within budget?
we don't
You
have
know,
a budget.
But we're also
It's
looking
gonna
at,
be tight.
Right.
If we had $200,000, it'd still be tight.
Yeah.
That's
Well-
the nature of a lot of consultancy business.
Right.
That particularly when there's public process and input as part of it.
and that's the critical part of this. Anyhow, the comment that I wanted to make is, I think we're a little, have a little PTSD from dealing with the consultant that we were just dealing with. Now, our expectation is we're going to get somebody who is really experienced in master plans, hopefully knowing our town, which will help to focus. I think, I think we're thinking about somebody who perhaps isn't as skilled as somebody else, and that's our goal for this consultant, to really hone in on somebody who has a good handle on this, a small town, let's get it going. They can look at the material, the data that we have, and probably make a lot more sense of it than somebody who perhaps is less experienced. So that would be a goal for a consultant.
I just want to add, I think there's another option here, and that is take, if this isn't, I've heard RFQ and RFP, but I think if you really want an RFQ, which is request for qualifications, put that out immediately to people with an outline of asking them to, describe what their approach would be. And we as a group could come up with wording for that. What is your approach? What team would you put together? And, can you show us any documentation of what you've done before of a similar nature? If we get a lot of responses, then do a selection down to 1 or 2 or 3, interview them, pick one, and then ask that person, what can we do for the remaining budget that might make sense, And I think you, Patrick, you had an interesting idea there to combine these, protect, provide, grow aspects, not deal with the individual elements like housing, because a lot of that material's already really been documented. It doesn't conform to what the state says your master plan ought to be, but this would be a different type of master plan, I think, because they want all of these elements, economic development and that. But if we could sort of pick and choose and sort of minimize some of those discussion points within each of those major categories, I think it would be an interesting exercise to go through that. And that would really, again, streamline the process down a little bit so that it would give us a shot at getting something.
Well, sorry, go on.
No, that's it.
Yeah, let me, if I could just simplify this a little bit, because I think simplification is where you're going on this thing, Amy,
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
And I think what we've done to date with existing conditions is determine that we essentially only have certain resources that we can exploit for this. We don't have a lot of land. We just don't have a lot of land. So we're not going to go continue to, the second thing is that people like this town. People come here, they like the open space, they like everything. The problem is it can't continue like it is, so something has to happen. Eric came and tried out a presentation to a small group, and I think maybe we should hold their feet to the fire, Patrick, and get Eric in to make that presentation to this group. And essentially what Eric did, he went through a whole exercise because it's a revenue situation and it's a cost control situation. But basically on the revenue side, he said, the only way you're going to get the revenue is through commercial development.
So I'm
you've
just
got a
going to
limited
interrupt
amount of
because,
land. Hang on, I'm going to scope
but,
this thing. I'm trying to scope this thing, which is what you call for, Dana, right?
well, okay.
And then you
I
can
just-
rebut.
Well, no, I just feel like you're not talking about scope, you're talking about what you want for the town.
I'm not. Eric essentially did that work. He tried it out on a small group, and he was just trying to figure out whether people would relate to it, and he would then come and present it to the whole committee. But that was the conclusion of it, and it becomes, that's what he's going to do, I'm assuming, Patrick.
Yeah.
So he outlined a solution, given what we have and the resources that are available to us. So what we need to do now is go forward based on preservation of what we've got and how we deal with the funding. And so if we can quantify what we need in order to protect what we've got, then the last stage is the only thing that this scoping needs to really go in. That it would be the scope for the last consultant at this stage. It would be my contention. And that's a good limited objective to put together, because I think all the groundwork has really been done. There is not a lot of land. There's only certain land that could or should be available. And so it's going to have to go from there. I think it's pretty simple and straightforward at this point.
There are really 3 legs on a stool. One is the economy, one is the social aspect of the community, the other is the environment.
Right.
We cannot focus just on the economics of the town. We cannot and do a good job. So I think it's a matter of balancing things out so you have a stable and financially solid.
Well, are we going to change? The point is, I don't think we're going to change the other two, are we?
Well, in terms of what our task is, I think, to kind of come up with sustainable future, it involves all three of those. And I thought you were sort of going toward Eric Halverson's analysis and.
Well, if we're gonna preserve the other
Yeah.
two.
Yeah. I think it would be useful
He's saying
information, yeah.
this is the way.
I'm just trying to figure out what the scope is going to be going forward now in a reduced fashion, so we can get something, if that's going to be the course, to,
Emil, I think your tripod makes a lot of sense, and that definitely is the streamlined scope. I like that idea. Economics, environment, and what was the
and a
third?
social aspect of the community.
Okay, so the character of the town, what do you,
Yeah,
tell me
yeah.
that I'm sure you have it here somewhere.
No, I don't have it there. I just
Okay.
made it up.
Okay, but those are good scope
But those,
elements.
yeah, that's what every community really has to deal with in the end. And the town only has so many tools to work with. But to Marty's point, I think, it's good that we need to pass information down to the other boards and commissions as to an implementation of something. That's part of the master plan. So how we grapple with all of those within the budget's going to be a challenge. I mean, I don't have any answer right now.
Well, I don't think we can do it, because, we've talked about the zoning needs to be, a lot of things need to change in the course of achieving those objectives that you just outlined. There's no
Yeah.
question about it.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's
But we need the means.
later, right, that's later.
So I really like what Dana said about public engagement, and Rosa, I think we're all talking about public engagement, but to think about this in a way of how do we best do an educated discussion? We have a lot of information, and I'm kind of thinking, in terms of what to protect, we have so much information about what's already protected, where things are. There's robust trail systems if we can get them on the map. But thinking about kind of a facilitated charrette about a mapping exercise of confirming what it is that is really important and special about Hamilton and want to protect. And then so that we confirmed that information of protect and kind of had maps out and people, and we can talk about it. But also someone who can talk about what we know and all the existing conditions, existing protections, and what's already there. We're not talking about changing it. Because as Jack mentioned, and people have moved here for a reason, there's community character for a reason, but where are opportunity areas that we should be talking about? So if we can go through that exercise and then identify kind of what are these areas that might be in flux? We know some of them right in front of us of Gordon Conwell, this is what happens with the schools, but there's more than just that right in front of us. So what are those? And then have a real public discussion about what is it that what we need, what is it that people are looking for, not on those parcels that we're protecting, but those other areas that we might want to see something else. We talked about a lot in the last year at Shop Local about downtown, and there's not like, where can we come sit downtown anyway, just different things about that, about other areas of town, about the creative economy really moving forward and people kind of leaving traditional jobs, and how do we provide spaces for people to work in the writer's workshop. Anyway, it just recognizing the opportunity, and then what we need to provide. We just had the water study. We have issues. We all have water issues, but we have issues that, what is it that we can do? What is it we need help doing? And what is it that, if we can connect the dots of what do we want and then what's needed? If we want more downtown, we need to figure out the wastewater situation. But I don't think we need to solve all those problems in the scope, but look at kind of identifying what the more narrow discussion should be about in whatever comes next. I think it would be a successful piece, and getting that public input to say that we've gone out and we've asked and we've educated and we've listened, and this is what we heard. So then we can actually have a really good starting point to do more in-depth work later. Anyway, so I think those pieces are directly under protect, provide, grow, and how do we put those exercises within that framework of what we need.
Yeah, and I think one of the, I guess I'm just thinking a little bit about the water situation, and there are dramatic limitations as to what we can do with our current water. But I think We had talked about this in the very recent past, talking about this isn't a discussion about trade-offs. The purpose is to really think about what we would like. And now that we have the water study, we know that there are constraints, and we can talk about that realistically. But I agree with what you're saying, the public engagement, and that's, I'll go back to just one more time talking about the importance of a survey. I don't think it needs to be that expensive. We can really push it online. We can try getting high school kids. We can put it at the senior center. I mean, there are so many ways that we can do it, and that's so critical for public engagement. We have, I believe at last count, there were 261 surveys, which is not a reliable sample of, I mean, I think if you wanted to put it out to the nth degree, it might be, but I think realistically, when I look at the 2016 survey, we had close to 1,000 responses.
So Rosie, because I agree with you.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of if you were writing it for scope, we wouldn't necessarily say survey. What we would say is more, we want a deeper public engagement.
Yeah,
or more,
okay.
because it's, like, I actually agree with you. However, I would be open to a consultant saying, hey, you know what? A better way to get that information is to do X. Like, we might find that, like, for example, that November visioning session was terrific, and and that was a different, so,
Right.
like, I would be hesitant to write that, like, a specific, but more, I would say, does the group feel like we want part of the scope to be more sort of diverse and just a larger number of people, you know, we have some direct feedback from them, or public engagement in some. I mean, I don't know whether people agree with that, but I think that could be a scope rather than the detail.
You know,
I also
it's
know
laudable.
Lauren is trying to talk too. She's raising her hand.
It's laudable, but the point is, and I think that's something that could get settled out during the interviewing of candidates process, for example, if somebody has a means of doing that. I just keep going back to the idea that we have a hard time getting a quorum for town meeting, for God's sake. I mean, to get anybody
Right,
exercising in the town.
but the thing about it is that, and this is always true about any group, there's always a really small number of people that are really doing the, you know, it's the same. I mean, in other words, it's the same in any organization. There's a small number of volunteers, a small number of people that are deeply involved. But it's our job, and it's the consultant's job, to really dig into the community and the real diversity of the community, all different
Exactly.
ages, economic structures, like, because that's going to be what makes this better. Like, if we only get answers of what do we want to protect from the people who are highly engaged, we're not really serving the whole community, as our job is to serve everyone.
Right.
And not,
Right. But I also think, I mean, we have so much data that we've, through this process and through the other processes that have happened with the water study, with the downtown study, the 2016 survey even, that how can we convey information so we can get educated feedback back?
I guess that's what because I'm really focused on our agenda item, which is writing the scope. And to my way of thinking, I would say, and maybe people don't agree, but I'm suggesting that a scope item would be something that says a public engagement plan, and you could
Talk
say,
about it later.
well, you know, that we would want a
Flesh it
public
out.
engagement plan from them. I mean,
Within the framework, within Protect, Provide, Grow framework?
correct.
Yeah,
That,
I
like,
agree.
That to me, I don't know, I've never done this before. I don't know how detailed it is, but I am feeling like what is going to happen is we are going to leave here tonight and we're not going to have a scope written. And
Okay.
you know, I think we need to start making some decisions, writing some things down.
I think candidly, if we go back to that public participation component and expand that, then the $50,000 budget is now going to be consumed. Probably half of it would go to that process. That's just a guess, but I suspect it would be substantial. that would leave $25,000 to pull the whole thing together. And I don't think that's conceivable at all. I just don't see it as conceivable.
Yeah, I mean,
So if you had another visioning session, you actually did a new survey or modified the ones that we have on the table, got them printed out, sent them out at some point to the public, or had them distributed in different fashions all over town, I think it would consume a big chunk of the money that's left. And I find it very difficult to conceive of a consultant being able to pull the remaining components of a master plan together for $25,000 or $30,000. I just don't see it. And Carolyn, you can speak to that because, as you say, you were a consultant, but writing the master plan itself is an enormous job. Just putting together the graphics, the maps, incorporating it all into a cogent text that people can read and understand, that takes a long time and requires a
well, I mean, I think, at least, that's sort of what I was saying a few minutes ago. I was sort of saying, we can do a bunch of different things. One of them is to create the scope that we want, and
let the chips fall.
and then have, put that out there and have consultants say, well, that's going to cost whatever it is, and it's above our budget. A second option is to create a more narrowed scope. Lauren is definitely
Lauren,
trying to
go
talk.
Yeah, I just want to, yes, I agree with that, Dana, and I agree, I think that's a very useful framework for us to try and focus our conversation using, because it feels very actionable to me, and I share your concern that we may leave this meeting without having made a decision. So I want to emphasize that and make that known. With regard to the recent comments about public engagement, this is a question that I have. So first, a statement. I'm hearing a lot of agreement around kind of trying to frame our master plan along the 3 buckets of what to protect, what to provide, how to grow. I agree. It may be extremely costly for us to try and do a whole nother public engagement exercise with the limited funds that we have available. My question is, we had, as Kristen mentioned, a really engaged, successful session last year. Is it reasonable, with what Weston and Sampson is agreeing to do for us, closing this out, to ask them to consolidate the feedback received from the community into these 3 buckets? So we have, I feel like we have the chapters based on desk research from them, but we don't have the community feedback that feeds into those same buckets. If we could consolidate those 2 pieces from them, we are well positioned with what we have to see where the gaps remain in those 3 buckets to achieve something useful at the end of this.
That's a good comment, Lauren.
I think we did have a very successful gathering last time, but it brought in 45 people. At least we got the surveys. We put out surveys in every warrant that went to every household. That would have been, 2,500 people. And we got back, 200 or something like that. And then we added again an effort to collect more at the town meeting itself, and we got another, in the end, we ended up with 256 or 300 or something like that.
161.
My observation is that until people feel threatened, they don't participate. It just doesn't happen. So, and the one thing that the surveys did seem to show is that people are happy with the town. They don't like the taxes continually going up. So I think it's a pretty simple.
I guess I'm going to try one more time. I'm very concerned that our topic is the scope, but I feel like when you're injecting, what people think in town is they're happy with the town, but they're not happy with the taxes. That's an opinion statement.
No,
I'm not.
That's my reading of the survey.
Okay, but those are not, this is a concern I've had about the committee since the beginning, is that I feel like people have made decisions or we aren't at a point to say that yet. We're not at a point to say, the problem in town is that I'm not saying that that's a crazy statement. I live here, but that's not part of the scope. Part of the scope is determining, like, it's not okay with me to go in and say, okay, we're going to start the master planning with the mindset that our focus is going to be about lowering taxes. I don't know how to frame this in any other way except to say
That's the
that.
existing condition that we've identified.
I think
It could be changed, it could be an argument
I think it's the
against.
interconnectivity of this, right? Which is like, everyone loves green space. But if someone said, if you said, we talk about growing, right? And we need to be asking the right questions, because we can't say unilaterally we protect everything and then we lower taxes. Because if you said to somebody, your taxes are gonna go up, but we're gonna have an Olympic-sized pool and a skate park and 19 horse stalls and ATVs downtown, somebody might be like, for that, you could raise my taxes. The same way that somebody might say, preserve it all, but if we said, hey, we're gonna put a skate park here and take this away, they'd say, oh, well, preserve it all except for that. That's the conversation I don't think we're having with the public, is the interconnectivity of these things, which is when you pull them apart separately and say, there's protecting, there's growing, it's like, but what are the trade-offs? And what I think isn't coming out of this process is a scope that shows options to the public and gets their reaction to that, to say, how do you feel about this?
Right,
If
but-
we protected it all, how do you feel?
But I
If we
guess
protected some of it,
It's well and good, Caroline, but the fact of the matter is, as we've determined the existing condition, a tremendous amount of the land out there that could go to one way or another is already protected in perpetuity.
That's fine, but there's 12% that's not.
Right,
So what do we do with that?
to
Right,
cut-
well, and that's the question. That's the scope. What's the opportunity and what's the conversation around that? And I think that's a piece along with a public, we can't not do a public engagement strategy. I mean, whether it's this big or this big, that has to be part of the scope, and I agree with.
But we can't blow half the budget on it,
Well,
whatever the
we're
budget
just
is.
putting it
The point
on
is
a
that
bullet
you could-
point to
you could blow the whole
propose.
thing. That scope is what we're deciding, which is
Right.
the deliverable from this consultant, from the second round. What are the questions that we have to have answered? And to Dana's point, it's everything that was in the original scope, and if we can't do that, we need to pull back and ask for more money. There's a streamlining of the scope to say, actually, within the protect, provide, grow framework, and using our current existing conditions, focus on these 3 questions that we want answered. There's that. Or there's some other scope. But it isn't give me the answer to this specific question. It's what are the questions we need to be focusing on, and that is the scope. And I think that's where we need to get to tonight, is like, if someone hands us a document, what answers do we need in that document for this to be a successful process?
In terms of the survey, we had a question at the tail end that was designed or intended to say, well, everything that you checked off above, essentially, how would you pay for it? Would you want to take money away from current, or would you want your taxes raised? That question didn't make it to the first survey that was printed. I'm not sure if it made it to the second, but I think we recognize that's an important issue. Before I forget, and I know I'm throwing everybody off, but I did want to say to you, Carolyn, that in one exchange with the consultant during this public-type meeting, when it was pointed out that they had expended about 94 or so % of the public engagement category, with one meeting in November, essentially, Jim, the consultant, said, well, these meetings are public. This is part of the public engagement. That angered me. It was clearly a deliberate misapplication of the concept. And I wanted you to be aware of that in terms of if you're doing the negotiating, or you're certainly in touch with those persons who are, that seems to me to be a nice clawback concept.
Yeah, and part of that is just the way that the contract was structured was, again, that these things weren't broken down into value-based sections or cost-based sections, and so, you know, they can come back to us and say, well, the actual deliverable was only worth $5,000. So we actually did do everything, and it's like, we have no traction
I
to say.
just wanted you to be aware.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Does anyone have any ideas of what they'd like the scope to say?
Opinions that I don't think y'all are gonna agree with, so I'm gonna keep myself.
Well,
So
Dana,
I'd like to suggest that we keep the format, protect, provide, grow. I think overall, the scope needs to pull together, I mean, what we know. There's a lot of things we know that we've studied and we've done in existing conditions. So pull together what we know, not rewrite it necessarily, but just, that's data that's informing this process. I think, as we already mentioned, I think there needs to be a piece of a public engagement process on each topic. I mean, I think it's iterative in terms of when we, meet with someone and work out the contract, but we need to have a public engagement process of some sort in each of these topics. One, to confirm what to protect, and then, so I think that, pull together what we know, create a public engagement process under each of these headings. It might be one, but just under these headings. Talk about just opportunities and constraints. I mean, and that kind of goes into what we can pull from what we know, but also from what we know, what don't we know that we need to ask and get feedback about, to then put it into kind of a moving forward plan, and then maybe that's it. Maybe that's it
Okay,
for this.
I'm
but
gonna
that's
read back what you
a
said.
piece that is useful, I guess. And
Is it okay?
yeah.
If I read back what she said? Okay, this is what I heard. And I have never written a scope. Some of you have a lot of experience in this, so I don't. But this is what I heard, that the incoming Phase 2 would consist of the consultant pulling together, evaluating and pulling together the existing Weston and Sampson materials, creating a public engagement process and plan, getting clarity on what the community wants to protect, provide, and grow, and then providing information on what the opportunities and options and constraints are to achieve those three things: protect, provide, and grow. I don't know what a scope looks like, but is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's where we inform the public engagement. What is it that we know that we can educate, and what is it that we don't know that we need to ask to then get a fuller picture?
That's a good point, because I think sometimes some people decide they want sort of, well, we need more housing to bring down our taxes, and we need more development in the downtown. So is there some place that the consultant would be able to help us phrase the limitations, so that when we have public engagement, without necessarily making it a trade-off, A or B, we could talk about limitations of the town facilities, like we don't have a sewer system, we do have a finite water supply. We know that high-density housing, it has been shown on our housing production plan and the master plan housing portion that was just done, it shows that the high-density housing tends to be net negative to the town. So perhaps that would,
Well, I
be
think
part of
that,
it.
I mean, I think in what Kristen said, what I just listed were the end
Yeah.
sort of final is, what are the opportunities, what are the options, and what are the limitations and constraints?
Right.
So I would imagine that
yeah, those are,
housing, for example, as an example, which would be under grow, right? Potentially, that you would have, what are the opportunities for increased housing? What are the options? And what are the limitations and constraints? Like, that would be what we would be expecting from them.
But even if you don't come to a final, well, knowing that, then we should. I mean, but even if you come to, we've identified under that top, like, we've identified those things.
Well, that's, I
And we
mean,
might not get to, like, okay, knowing those things, where do we go?
Well, it's simple.
Maybe
It's
we've
just
identified
asking
those
the
things, and
questions.
Right.
Yeah,
that's
I
valuable
agree,
information.
I agree.
right, like, I guess that's what I'm saying, is that you didn't, that's what, I just wrote it down, what you said, but I'm agreeing with you that, like, that is not an ask for, we would not be asking, if we chose to do this, right, that we would not be asking them for a specific, do this, 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 and this. Instead, you'd be saying, here are some options, here are some limitations to those options here. I mean,
And we might not even need to ask the limitation, I mean, because those might already be things we know. What do we not know? Like, if
Right.
Right.
affordable housing is important, how do we want to phrase a question for where we know that it might be possible, an opportunity, we want to talk about? What do you think, like, about, these different areas? And then at least break it down, narrow it down, so we get feedback that will help us inform where we go next.
Well, just another twist on this, because I took the original scope of work, and so what I wrote was, instead of provide
Here,
public outreach, I said, assess the sufficiency of the public participation plan produced by Weston and Sampson and the results that plan, the results of that plan, and then determine whether additional outreach and/or surveys are necessary, and if so, recommend the most expeditious means of collecting additional data. And I think if we have a survey, there's no sense asking people, these wish lists of things when our infrastructure won't support it. So the question has to be limited. You want more housing, you can't have it just anywhere you want. I mean, you want all this stuff, but we don't have a town sewer system. The questions have to contain the limitation, or else they're meaningless. They're just a wish list, they're
Right.
just a fantasy. So I wasn't party to the original survey, but those questions have to be based on reality. So, like the high school kids come in and they say they want a bowling alley. Well, that's fabulous, but where are we gonna put the bowling?
okay, but again, I've heard about the bowling alley. We're not building a bowling alley anyway. Towns don't build bowling alleys.
Well,
That
no,
would
but-
be that's about economic development.
I
What kind of
understand.
businesses do we want to bring
I
in?
understand that, but there, again, to Jack's point, we have limited space in the downtown area, and that's a commercial operation, so it would have to be in the commercial district. So I'm just using that as an example, but whatever questions we ask, they have to be predicated on the realities that the town faces. And we have a water, the Dewberry Water report is, I won't say alarming, but it's certainly concerning. It is a limitation on the town's capacity to grow. The sewer system, or lack of a sewer system, is a limitation on the town's capacity to grow. And, so any further questions really should be targeted in ways that we get good answers and not just a wish list.
I absolutely agree, and that's why it's so important to figure out what we know and what we don't know and what we
Right,
need
but
to
I think
ask.
that the consultants
Yeah.
who have the experience in drafting these surveys should look at what we have and assess its reliability, and then if they find that there are gaps in that, then target the questions
Yep.
for the three items that Emil has.
Right.
Yeah,
We did.
Can I say something
Compared
on
to survey
this?
or another type
I-
of engagement.
Yeah, let me just say, I think what's missing, public engagement is important, but the other part of that, a big part of that is good professional planning. They go hand in hand, and I think one of the reasons you get low turnout in surveys is that people, A, not interested, B, they don't know enough about the material to make an intelligent comment on it, and probably other reasons. But I think the public engagement doesn't mean just surveys, I think, and I think the workshop idea is a good one, periodic workshop, a couple of them. But I think going back to a survey now that we have two, and we had a pretty good one in 2016, the information probably isn't going to change, given the questions we're going to ask them. I really don't, I think anytime we spend now talking about surveys, I don't think is really good use of time. In the end, I know that the concern is that the public has to make the final choices. But I think with the workshops, there's going to be a feedback loop. If there's an update by this committee to the public engagement, that if certain decisions are made, you go to the public and get feedback, and you take it to the next level and make changes. You go to the next workshop, and there's a feedback loop, and you make more changes there. So it's a sequence of getting the information. This is something Weston and Sampson should have done as part of a sequencing of their work, so that what you do is gradually bring out the important information. And the critical thing in surveys is to get good information, not just information. It's the same thing like building. You don't just build, you want to build well. So that's the key, really. And I think that I like the workshop idea as part of that public engagement. I think that works, given the budget we have.
I just wanted to, one of the things that I wrote down when Marnie was talking is, you know, in terms of the scope, would be to assess the sufficiency of the Weston and Sampson's previous public engagement, and then, you know, Marnie sort of said, and supply a plan to go forward. And I think that's what you're saying, is that to me, that's sufficient information for a scope, is to say,
Yeah.
we would expect them to look at what's been done, and then moving forward, so we don't know whether it's going to be a survey, another visioning session, some other, you know, whatever, but that, you know, so that's not us saying we want you to create a public engagement. I mean, it is us saying we want you to create a public engagement process, but it's more saying specifically, we've done all this, we want you to look at it.
And assess its reliability.
Yep,
And they
assess
could
its-
come back and say, you know what, there's enough information here.
Right.
We've looked at the 2016
Right.
survey.
Right, they might say it's enough, or they might say, you know what you really want to do is, like Emil just said, what you actually want to do is wait until you've gotten X, Y, and Z done, and then let's have a different kind of a session. Like, I think
Yeah,
that's an
that-
appropriate,
Right.
That's why-
identify the
appropriate,
wins, but-
for the scope, I think that's an appropriate
Yeah.
thing to say, is to assess the sufficiency and create a plan based on that going forward.
Yeah, I'll vote for that.
Isn't
I'm gonna start making
that the same thing as, isn't that the same thing as saying that the scope would be to get us to the finish line and define the finish line, and leave it up to them as professionals to look at what's been done to date and lay out a program and a price?
Yeah, we're going to need the professional input all along. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, that's just
That's what we
a
need.
given.
Yeah.
That was the whole problem with Weston and Sampson. They didn't understand the scale at which they were supposed to be operating and so forth. I mean, it was,
No, I mean, the professionalism is what we're looking for. I mean, I've said this before, we're looking for a consultant to bring their expertise in master planning into the room, so that
Right.
if we say, hey, we really want to do a survey, and they have experience to say, you know, I actually don't think a survey is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I think you really should do X, and here's why. That's their job.
Right.
The benefit of the survey,
set.
the benefit of the survey really is that visioning part of it, that meeting we had back in November. It's when you want all the ideas on the table. Not solving problems, I don't think, you know, that's where I think the feedback loop becomes more important. You're not looking for people to come up with solutions. So that's why that's why we didn't really pursue I think the economic end of it, you know, in the early stages, was we were looking for all the ideas on the table, as good and bad and outrageous ideas. But the idea is put everything down so that we and the consultant could sort of sort through which ones are really valid, which ones will never happen. Ultimately, it's going to fall on the town, I think, to make decisions about which ones the town wants to do. The people aren't going to decide that. It's going to be the governance that makes those decisions. So I'm not, you know, I like the public outreach because you get great ideas and you need input from different directions. But I think we can't get stalled on a continue to survey people at this stage. I think it's not good use of the amount of money we have left. So I think that's a good, Dana, it's a good scope item.
That's Marnie. I just wrote it down.
And we do have the 2016 survey. I mean, that
Yeah.
was a good survey. It was
Good responses, too. I have
widely
1,000 people,
responded
yeah.
to, right? So if a consultant who is expert in the area thinks that that's sufficient, that's great. That's great.
I mean,
Well,
I don't think it's really up to us to tell them how to do their job.
No.
We're looking for somebody who knows how to do this, and we want them to chart out the course, and then if we think it sounds reasonable, I mean, that's what I think
Yeah.
I've got here. If they say, hey, we need to know this, okay, fine, and then we don't have it,
Right.
that's one thing, but we're looking for professional expertise at this point to get this thing done.
Yeah, right.
We're
Okay.
counting on them to know what the hell they're doing.
So are
we
we in
need to-
agreement that the first item of the scope is to assess the efficiency of Weston and Sampson's public engagement and to provide a plan to move forward with public engagement?
We're gonna request that they make a recommendation before they agree to the scope, because you can't put an open-ended item in the actual scope, because then they won't know the percentage of the budget based on what they would have to deliver. So I think that would be one of the questions you would have to put to them before.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
everything else in your scope is actually, like, follows sort of the general rules for this. I think what we would say is, before you agree to the scope, there is an outlier, which is public engagement. We feel there hasn't been sufficient public engagement in the way that we had thought it was going to be, but if you would look at these
We'd like your
things-
opinion.
Yeah, assess it, and then make sure that you can get what you need within the scope that we have. That way we don't end up in a situation where 3 months in, they're like,
So I think assess the sufficiency of Weston and Sampson's public engagement is a deliverable. That's a concrete deliverable, to assess that, correct? Right? No?
I
Right.
think we're trying to tell them how to do their job.
Okay.
I like where you're going. I don't know if we should.
I am literally just writing things down that other people are saying. I'm just trying to move us towards.
No, I know, and that's why
I like
want
that, Dana.
rhythm is.
I think that
no,
Lauren has something to say.
No, I do like, I mean, I actually don't think that's telling them how to do their job, because I think it's just asking them a question based on their expert opinion. And if they think it's sufficient, then they do. If they don't, then they provide us with the exact details as to what would make it sufficient.
Isn't, that's the interview process. Isn't that really what we're talking about here, is the interview process to see who, in the end, we want to select?
I mean, we only had one applicant last time, and it was Weston and Sampson.
Yeah, I know.
So I think the hope this time is that we could have a list of questions and scope and have a very candid conversation with whomever to say, this is what we need to know from you and this is what we want.
Yeah, these are good
Can be
questions
done in
to
this.
pose to them.
So, yeah, I don't think that it's so much us telling them to do their job as being clear with our current realities and making sure that they understand the expectations that we have relative to what we can pay them and the timeline that we have.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, Dana, as you're like writing this down, because I was also writing it down here, I think it's useful to delineate the activities that we would like the consultant to do and the deliverable items we want them to produce. I think those are two related but discrete elements of the scope. Is a personal opinion, I could be wrong, but
So what are some of the activities and deliverables that you have written down?
yeah, so I think, I mean, it aligns with like activities, assess the need for additional public engagement and the sufficiency of current public engagement. Activity, evaluate existing phase one research and for reliability and consistency. Activity is pull together relevant phase one research and phase one public engagement into the below three-part framework: what to protect, what to provide, how to grow. Another activity is to develop and execute a phase two public engagement plan, potentially inclusive of both a survey element and a public forum. I know that's just been kind of discussed and questioned. And then based on the above, with guidance from the Master Plan Steering Committee to identify opportunities, options, limitations, and constraints in each of those sections. Then I think we outline with a little bit more specificity what we want the end master planning document itself to be, or maybe to Jack's point, that's what we ask them to deliver. But that way, tying back to the point Caroline raised initially, we have in the contract a specific set of line items that we can come back to and say, you delivered X, Y, and Z to us, or did not.
Well, that's where we got to define what the final what the finish line is. That's why I say that finding the finish line is important here, what we really want out of this thing.
I think that's what Dana's third bullet point was, though.
Yeah.
And I think within that, it's the protect, provide framework that has opportunities, considerations, and liabilities or
Right.
whatever.
Limitations, yeah.
Limitations.
Right, I mean, I actually think Lauren, you know, we both have pretty, almost the same thing written down.
Yeah.
Lauren.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Yeah,
good.
exactly. So, I mean,
I wrote this yesterday. We're on the same page.
I think the final sort of deliverable would be, and I would not say we want to tell them what it should look like,
Right.
but the final deliverable should provide us within Protect, Provide, and Grow, what are the opportunities, the options, and the constraints and limitations for each of those areas.
Yeah, that should be part of the selection process. Evaluate what they deliver in the interview, yeah.
Right, because I don't,
So it's-
right,
it's
in
an-
other words, we
The
don't,
criteria for choosing somebody, right,
right, what they say to that. No, we're not going to tell them what
right.
it should look like, you know.
Right, right.
And this may be micro, but an idea, I think it would be really useful for them to come to the table with like what they see as 3 good master plans from other towns, so we have a sense of where their vision is going. Like, it's not this open-ended, could be anything. It's maybe a useful reference point.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we need to come down on something, I think, or they need to give their professional opinion as to the best deliverable on the.
And I think the deliverables should include both, you know, obviously text, but additional mapping based on the feedback that we get through those discussions. So wherever we left off with Wesson and Sampson, to just make sure that we're, you know, existing to kind of potentials and constraints. So,
I would, yeah, Lauren, it makes me wonder, like, after the impact assessment and review of the existing conditions, like, I think a deliverable might be a gap analysis.
Yeah.
And then the gap analysis allows us to determine how much additional research and public engagement is required. Because ultimately, right, we're asking you to look at everything we have.
Yeah,
What story is it telling? And then I need a gap analysis of that story, and I need you then to go find additional information, data, or research.
or develop the questions to ask in the public engagement.
Yep.
I mean, that's exactly it. There is so much we know.
Yep.
So what is it that we still need to know?
So it's assessing the existing conditions, but also the existing documentation. It's putting that into the Protect, Provide framework, which includes the sub-framework within GROW, which is economic, social, and
Environment.
Environment.
So that's the sub-framework within that, and it only applies right to GROW.
It could apply to any of them.
can
But-
apply to any of them, yeah.
Okay.
But especially grow, because that's in the future, yeah.
So after they've done that work of placing all of the existing stuff that we have, which would include anything that came out of the November
Mhm.
and the survey, so they're sort of layering those frameworks together within Protect, Provide, and Grow. Then we're asking for a gap analysis of what's missing in order to build towards the deliverable, which is this integrated recommendations document that has all of that. And within that, where are the points in which we need town feedback
Mhm.
in order to pressure test the conclusions that we're coming to within the stage, right?
Say that again,
Which part?
just what you did the last part about,
Like, so there's this idea that we keep talking about public engagement, which is kind of, I think we keep talking about it as the inputs, but there's also this secondary public engagement, which is once we have some ideas, do we want the public to react to those?
Yeah, the
Yeah,
confirmation. that
That's,
so I
that's the
just-
feedback,
Yeah.
Asking
Right,
them,
right.
like, yes, you told us you wanted a skate park, JK, look at this, how do you feel about these? So like,
Yeah.
one of the public.
I understanding what you're saying, I just sort of thinking about how is that, like what's the,
It could just be, to your point, the one item of the public, like, what does public engagement look like?
Yeah,
And I think we can ask for their expertise, but I think we also as a group have to decide, if they come back and say, we actually don't believe in talking to the public, that's sort of our thing, are we okay with that? Or do we say, we don't feel okay with that because we're a town of of a couple thousand people and like, we really need people to, so are there places in which we wanna recommend that we'd like feedback? And I do think that before they put everything in a tome, you'd wanna do like workshop sessions with focus groups of 20 people, a couple, for 3 weeks, to just hear what people have to say and react to it. Or however they do that within their organization.
I guess I'm a little hung up on the modality of how we get that, but I trust somebody smarter than I am.
In terms of like, how do you like actually get people to show up in a room and do it?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what we need, that's what we're saying we need a strategy, and then we're asking for how to do that. But it's not a strategy of just, hey, what do you think? It's, this is what we know. Based on that, these are the directions, like, what about, like, the feedback on those things, I think are very important. And it also, I mean, we need to do public engagement in terms of, to validate this whole process. I mean, it's just.
And we might be knocking on people's doors, honestly, like,
Yeah.
we might be putting QR codes in businesses downtown that says, sign up for a public engagement session, like, there are many, many stones we did not turn, not because
Oh, so many.
we didn't want to, but because we maybe thought that the former leadership was going to guide us in that, and they didn't.
Right.
And so we may have to take, because we don't have the budget, we may have to decide, like, we're gonna go out there with hot dog suits on, and we're gonna inspire people.
But there's so much information that we know, and it's not on the website. Can we at least put it there, so then we
So I
can
think
say to
that's
people,
another part of the scope,
go,
is updating,
go to this place to find all this wonderful information.
yeah.
Well, I see that as, I mean, in other words, okay,
I have to go, by the
I
way.
have to go at 8:30. I'm trying to really try to so do we want, I don't know, I'll stop. Somebody else can say if that, I'm really determined to try to get something on paper,
I think
but,
the framework that you have is 70% there. I think we need to now go in, and maybe we don't do that tonight, we need to figure out like the nitty gritties, which is like, is updating the website considered public engagement? And if it's not, do we need to make sure that that's a line item in the scope, which is management and updating of the website? So that we are clear on whether it's our job to update that website internally or whether they're gonna do it.
They won't. Okay, who's going to write this up?
Dana's right.
Dana?
well, I actually think, Lauren, do you have it? I assume you were doing it on your
I
computer.
am, yeah. I think, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to share what I've pulled together.
Yeah, I mean, I can, but I'm actually writing on a piece of paper. It looks like you've got it.
I have it on a Word
Yeah.
document, yeah.
So digital, Lauren, so digital.
Yeah, I mean, but as part of the public engagement strategy, it's where are we publicly putting information is a
Right, I mean, I had written down public engagement, parentheses, two-way, meaning,
Absolutely.
and I didn't I wasn't specific because I want their expertise. Like, if we're saying two-way public engagement, to me, that feels like the website and feels like visioning sessions where people come and but they might say, oh, well, have you thought about,
Yeah, I mean, it could be the
and we-
website, it could be Facebook, it could be Instagram.
correct, it could be anything that we have not yet thought
something.
about.
So I just make sure we're clear with what they have to do, right, which is like, we can't kill the website at this point, right?
Right.
So I agree, like, let them give us expertise, I don't want the website to become like this thing that dies on the vine
Right.
because they didn't
Yeah,
agree to take it over.
Information needs to sit somewhere for people to find it. And as much as we can engage efficiently and cost effectively, let's do that.
Wow, that's progress.
Okay, so Lauren, you're gonna write this up in some form and get it to Patrick for distribution? Could you hear me?
Yes, I could, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I'll send it to Patrick within like 10 minutes of. And then, I mean, there may be gaps, so please, I'll send it with the caveat that I think we should all review and add
Yeah.
what I may have missed.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's great. What I'll do is send that out tonight, and if people can look over that over the holiday weekend, get that to me as early as you can on Tuesday, if not before, that'd be super.
Does everyone agree on this direction?
Do we want?
Do we need a vote on this
I was
direction?
going to say, do we want to have, I mean, like, have Lauren read what she has? We could make some sort of a motion that would say, understanding that that's a draft, but are we moving in that, you know, are we
Yeah,
comfortable
because
moving in that
We're not
direction?
going to meet again and
Right.
before it goes, I'm not sure what your timing is, but if you're putting meetings on hold.
That was the directive from the town manager, yes.
So what do you envision the timeline to be?
I'd like to get the scope together next week and begin soliciting that to the consultant world.
Is,
Okay.
does Lauren have the, can you, is it easy to have her share her screen? Or not?
Can you give her permission to share?
Sorry, Lauren, I'm not throwing you under the bus there.
Fine, I have a lot of things open, but let me just make sure I share the right.
We are shareable.
All right, this should be right. Let's see. Do you see, actually, do you see it now?
No, you just moved it over.
No, you moved
Okay,
it
I can
over.
see my
See it.
emails
There,
unsubscribed.
it's coming back.
There it is.
There it
Okay.
is. Okay.
Okay. So there's very possibly things that need to be amended. Do you want me to read it?
I think
Yeah,
you
Yeah.
can read it.
Okay,
I think we can see it.
okay.
And in public engagement, I would just make it a little more open-ended. Instead of survey element and, like, to be specific.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds good.
And,
For some reason, I'm having a weird thing with the computer right now.
And I suspect somebody with a lot of experience is going to know the best way to do that, so that we don't necessarily need to guide them.
Sorry for the like jumpiness. I think the document is a little corrupted on my computer right now. It keeps on.
okay, feedback aligned, that's good.
Yeah.
You might want to add just what we just talked about of just developing a place to publicly post
Okay.
what we know,
Yeah, that'd be good.
I mean, whether it's a website or something else.
Yes. Okay. I will.
Right, I think she's got that little two-way, which is not the way it
Yeah,
should
I
be.
added
It's
to
not
it,
the
but
way
I
it should
can
be in
flesh that
the.
out. Sorry. Whenever I
Yeah.
edit it, for some reason, it's like jumping down. And I don't know
We'll just
why.
read. We'll just read, Wade.
But yeah, just read it here.
I like that you have may include, so we can talk through it a little bit.
That was, yeah, so I feel like this is very useful, but it doesn't constrain us to this if we say may. Because and that's the end.
So,
Yeah, yes, so posting of information and also potential graphics and mapping, maybe deliverables.
Can we add climate change somewhere?
I think it's on the very bottom, sustainability and resiliency.
How to
Yeah,
grow.
I feel like the thematic elements are within that in terms of just action items.
right, at the very bottom, it says sustainability.
But I'm fine with adding sustainability, resilience, and climate change in it, so we're all
Yeah, just
interrelated.
put climate change after resiliency. There we go.
So I guess my question, Patrick, is what do you need from this committee in order, like, do you need a vote? Do you need, like, if Lauren sends this out and people make comments, do you feel like,
If people think that this is best representing the committee, send it to me. If you vote tonight, that's, solidifies that.
I guess my question is, would you feel comfortable if there were small, like, for example, we have the two-way is in there, and we don't know that that's really the best way to frame it, like, or wording-wise.
I can, yeah, that's,
confirming that directionally this represents
exactly.
what we want and how we want it.
Right.
I'm sorry, I was just with
To everyone,
Yeah.
yeah,
Is
no,
it-
to everyone's point, though, I think we need, well, the most important point is to end it at somewhere that's useful. It might not be our dream end, but somewhere that's useful to get to the next step, whatever that is.
Final step.
Right, but just knowing what we have left and what we want to do, we need to make sure.
That's where I think that last little point that says consolidate the above into a final master plan, I think it needs to be like, I don't know.
That's big.
Plan, it's like document, something around directional documentation or directional recommendations of, and I think, Dana, I liked the language that you had in your handwritten notes. I think they're up here actually.
Can you read that, Dana?
I think it was right there.
Opportunities,
Option, yeah,
constraints.
exactly, it's already there.
Okay.
Yeah, that's already there.
So maybe in deliverables, pull that, copy that and pull that to the end of kind of the report outlining with both, a report with, mapping and other graphics as
Okay.
needed.
Got it.
Because ultimately this is about like, where can we go, why would we go there, and how would we do it,
Mhm.
right? Like, that's kind of what we're trying to get to from this document.
Well, we might not even get to exactly how we would do it, but at least the options
Right.
bring us to
Correct, I think that's,
having the
Define them.
conversations about
Right.
how we do it.
exactly.
Right.
Do,
Well,
are
we need their
we,
recommendation, their professional recommendation.
No, I know, I mean, but it might be, you could do it in these ways,
correct,
Yeah.
but we don't choose it.
Yeah.
But
Really the
it's,
where and why.
Right.
And then the next phase
yeah,
would be like granular how we would do that. And that's
Okay.
with the committees and,
I mean, I don't think we're gonna get into a super deep implementation plan with what we have left.
no.
But it's a great, but we need this
We don't
get
need to,
there.
that'll be in the strategic plan anyway.
Right, but
Yeah.
we need this, this is the most valuable piece.
Identify the objective, yeah.
Are we good, or should?
Yeah, you want to, are we
Are we gonna,
there?
are we gonna
Want to make a
vote?
motion?
Motion that, to approve this as written,
As,
as defining the
to be
scope.
as amended, as to be
Yeah.
amended.
I think, all right, I'm gonna try.
Yeah.
All right, I move that we approve this general outline with the understanding that minor edits and wording may be implemented in order to put it forth as a scope.
Accepting. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. The motion is Dana. Who seconded?
Rosie?
Rosie. Okay, starting with Marnie.
Marty Crouch, aye.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Dave Wanker, aye.
Kristen Kastner, aye.
Jack Lawrence, aye.
Dana Lara, aye.
Abel Dahlquist, aye.
Caroline Bollieu, aye.
Lauren Lynch, aye.
Okay, unanimous. Unanimous. Okay, we got a motion to adjourn.
Oh, actually, I would like to make a point, and I think they'll appreciate it. Even though we have the scope of work, I think at some point we have to have an understanding of how this new consultant will be paid for each segment
Yeah.
Yes.
that they complete. And it has to be in a different format than what, how Weston and Sampson was doing.
Oh, yeah, the
Right.
contract needs to be much
So
more
that
specific.
aspect of any contract really has to be laid out, because it may be that the $50,000 won't go this far.
Agreed.
So this is subject to approval of the final language of the RFQ, or RFP, or whatever we're calling this thing, right?
Is it enough?
Yeah, well,
Are we just seeking entities that are qualified, or are they actually going to submit proposals on this scope of work?
I thought it was an RFQ, Patrick. Is that what you thought it was?
We've talked about using an RFQ. It allows us to direct the solicitations from companies that we know are good at it.
It just to shorten the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is more vague than an RFP would be.
And Patrick, what's the status of the committee's desire to participate in the interview process?
The town manager and chair of the Board of Selectmen appreciate the interest, but they have advised me that it's their selection.
I want to point out that the town manager was picked by virtue of a process that included a citizen committee interview process, as was the police chief. What's different about this?
Yeah, this is crazy.
Would you take back a renewed request, please, based
Yeah.
upon the logic of past practice, if nothing else?
Yep. Yep. Agreed. Okay. Do I have a motion? Second? All in favor? Marnie?
Marty Crouch, aye.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Yes?
Yes.
Dave Wanger, yes.
Susan Kastner, yes.
Jack Lawrence, aye.
Dana Larai.
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Kelly Volue, aye.
Lauren Lynch, aye.
Good. Thank you all.
Yes.